Part 16. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 153. Xu Huanyang smiled slightly, and said, I'm not sure, but I heard from the steward when I was a child that your grandfather's family has been secretly trying to grow this thing, because Emperor Sejong said that this thing is a treasure, and it is really long. It is golden, but it has been tried for many years without success. Although the yield per mu is higher than that of wheat, but because it is not delicious, the extra yield per mu is not enough. The grains are so different from the first generation, a small grain, and the corn planted after a few generations can no longer be used as seeds. Mom, how do you grow corn? Xu Huanyang shook her head in confusion. Mother only vaguely heard these things from the housekeeper's wife, but I have never seen them before, so how would I know? But it should be similar to planting wheat and rice. It was indeed similar to wheat and rice. Mu Yangling stood on the ground, watching Zhuang Dayi instructing him to pay attention to important matters in planting corn. My aunt listened very carefully, touched the corn kernels, and said, scattering like this is almost the same as planting wheat, except that it is thinner. Zhuang Dayi nodded again and again, just spread it thinner. Mu Yangling couldn't listen anymore. She stepped forward to snatch the corn seeds, and said, corn is not grown like this. She doesn't know how to grow wheat and rice. In her previous life, she only saw the corresponding broadcast on the agricultural channel of TV, but she knew how to grow corn. Because she hated it, she even went to the field to see how the nasty corn was grown. It came out, although I have only seen it, and it is a long time ago, but as long as I start to recall, the memory will be very clear. The distance between the corn plants is very large, with a distance of 1 foot. It is really like spreading wheat, like Zhuang Dayi said. It is strange that the corn that grows can grow up. Mu Yangling somewhat understood why the yield of the corn planted was low and the corn kernels were not as good as the next generation. You all grow corn like this? Mu Yangling asked Zhuang Dayi. Zhuang Dayi looked at her blankly. Isn't this how all food is grown? That's right, Aling, you've never planted corn before, and you've heard from brother Yu that they've been planting corn for several years. Don't you understand better than you? Auntie, corn can't be planted like this. Mu Yangling couldn't understand for a while, so he could only say, anyway, I have to listen to my planting this time. Chi Heiran stood by Mu Yangling's side. The corn you've planted for so many years hasn't yielded much, so let's listen to Aling. Fan Zijin also stood by Mu Yangling's side. I think Miss Mu seems to be very familiar with corn, so let's listen to Miss Mu. When Mu Yangling heard something in Fan Zijin's words, he snorted and said, my aunt is very lucky. God gave me a dream that I am the reincarnated Sheneng. Not only can I grow corn, but I can also grow other things. Chi Heiran looked at her suspiciously. Then why don't you even know how to grow wheat and rice? Mu Yangling choked, and said, that's because I lost my memory. God passed on so many skills to me all at once. I didn't remember so much all at once, and I slowly remembered it later. Except for the star-eyed sisters Yu Hongzailan and Xiao Bowen, who looked at her with reverence, everyone else thought she was talking nonsense. The aunt scolded her even more. How can you talk about ghosts and gods casually? Slap your mouth. Mu Yangling smiled and didn't care at all. She divided the seeds into a small bag and said, now there is no fertilizer, so we can only plant dry seeds. Although dry seeds, there must be standards. If we really want to spread like you, these 2 bags of seeds are not enough to plant 10 acres. In this way, plant 2 seeds 2 feet down, step on them gently with your feet, and then cover the soil. Mu Yangling demonstrated it again, and both my aunt and Zhuang Dayi couldn't accept it. It takes 2 feet to plant 2 seeds, what can grow from this? Of course the corn you plant grows corn. Listen to me, Mu Yangling insisted, that's what God told me, that's how corn is grown. Mu Shi trusted his daughter, and took the seeds from her hand first, because it was not like wheat that had to be continuously sprinkled down, and he put 2 seeds at a time, and he succeeded in planting the seeds for the first time. Then there are Xiaoheng and Xiaoboan, because they believe in Mu Yangling infinitely. Xiaolan naturally followed her sister, and used her clothes to pick up some seeds. Qi Heiran planted the land for the first time, and he also held some curiously and followed Mu Yangling. Only Fan Zijian, although he believed in Mu Yangling, did not mean that he would go to the field in person. He turned back to the barracks, and directly pulled his few after one hand. None of them had their arms broken. Although it was broken, it did not hinder their actions. He hung the cloth bag around his neck, planted the seeds with one hand, covered the soil with his feet, and finally caught up with Mu Shi at a speed. Zhuang Dai and his aunt sighed and had no choice but to help. Qi Heiran saw that the speed was not slow, but after all, it was more than 20 acres of land and it could not be planted so quickly. He dropped the seeds and ran to Mu Yangling, who was pulling the plow, and said, "Why don't I go back to the camp, bring more people over? It's useless for you to pull it. I have to pull the plow ahead." Qi Heiran saw her pull the iron plow easily, his hands were itchy, and said, "Let me try." Fan Zijian frowned, "Why do you like to do these things? Letting your soldiers know will damage your reputation." Qi Heiran curled his lips and said, "My lord is close to the people, not to mention, I have a part in this land." Mu Yangling stopped and looked at him with Fan Zijian. Qi Heiran shouted, "Why, you plan to take it all by yourself? Zijian and I bought the seed together." Fan Zijian came back to his senses, and hurriedly said, "Yes, Heiran and I bought this kind of seeds together, so we have a share anyway." Mu Yangling curled her lips and continued to pull the plow. Naturally, she didn't believe that they would take a fancy to the little money she produced in the field. They just wanted to harm her crops from time to time. Thinking that breeding rabbits still needs their prestige to shock the neighbors, he didn't mind, and waved, "Okay, you have a share, then quickly find someone to work." Mu Yangling looked at the disabled people brother, said, "Just look for them." Fan Zijian looked at Mu Yangling, "You are kind." Mu Yangling said flatly, "They guard the country and become like this. It has already made them shed blood and tears, so don't cut your heart out." Fan Zijian snorted indifferently. Qi Heiran's face was gloomy, and he clenched his fists tightly and said, "One day, the Lord will not let them bleed and then cry, let alone gouge out their hearts." Xingzhou Mansion is a border gate. There are constant wars every year. There are wars, there will be casualties. It is good to say that the army has pensions, although the imperial court gives a little, but Qi Ziyuan will make up some here. But Qi Ziyuan could only let those who were injured and retired or directly disabled to return to their hometowns with some money. The money is enough for their travel expenses. Those who are healthy go out, and those who are disabled go back. Those whose parents are still alive are fine, and at least have a bite to eat. Therefore, the disabled veterans who returned to their hometowns either ended up alone for life, or left home again and wandered alone. Most of them became beggars, and some even committed suicide due to the humiliation. Therefore, soldiers on the battlefield must either desperately save themselves, or desperately fight, and even kill the enemy as if they were injured after being injured. They would rather die to earn a pension for their family than live in such an aggrieved way. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 154. Qi Heiran is domineering, even a bit childish, but he can quickly win the hearts of the army. Apart from his ability and personal charm, the most important thing is that he unconditionally accepts the veterans, remnants, and wounded soldiers eliminated by the battalions. Some of these soldiers can't even remember where their hometown is, and many of them don't have the courage to go back to their hometown, let alone those disabled soldiers who are injured and sick. The army's willingness to keep them is giving them a way to survive. For Qi Heiran, who accepted them unconditionally, they are naturally infinitely grateful. You know, before Qi Heiran came, Those remnant soldiers did not have this kind of treatment, most of them were sent home after their wounds healed. These soldiers can do what they can in the 5th Battalion now, but there are too many wounded and disabled soldiers. Now the 5th Battalion's kitchen is occupied by the disabled soldiers, and they can't follow them into the mountains to hunt or go to the school field for training. They lack arms and legs. They can pass a brick when building a house, but they will be stared at by others when they go in and out of the barracks, especially the new recruits. They don't have the feeling of rabbit death and fox sadness like veterans. They just feel the existence of these people. He would grab food from them and hate them from the bottom of his heart. Mu Yangling's proposal to let these people farm the land was just to make them feel that they were still very useful and not for nothing, and the soldiers in the military camp saw that they were doing things for Chi Heiran, so they restrained themselves a little. Fan Zijian had no extra affection for those disabled soldiers. Except for his mother Chi Heiran and his cousin, in his eyes, people were only divided into useful and useless. But since Chi Heiran has such determination, even though he disagrees, he will try his best to help him achieve it. Mu Yangling pulled it back and forth twice. Seeing that Chi Heiran was a little depressed, he put the rope around his shoulders and said, "You do it, I'll plant the seeds." Only then did Chi Heiran restrain his mind, and pulled him forward with all his strength. Zhuang Dai, who was holding the plow behind him, shouted, "Stop, stop." He looked back, dumbfounded, and saw that the gully that had been opened was winding and winding, sometimes shallow and sometimes deep, so he said with a bitter face, "Little General, you are walking too fast, and it is still a curve. Look at the small plowed field, it's all curved." Chi Heiran looked back and saw that it was indeed the case, and said puzzledly, "I saw that Mu Yangling was pulling like this. Miss Mu is at a constant speed, she walks straight, and she has great strength. The small ones just need to press down. How is it the same as yours?" Fan Zijian narrowed his eyes slightly, and asked, "There is skill in pulling the plow, but ordinary people can't do it? Do you have the skill in holding the plow?" Zhuang Dai said with a smile, "Of course he is skilled. The plow is more learned than pulling the plow. If you want to learn it, you will have to work hard." "Then how long did it take you to learn to plow?" Zhuang Dai scratched his head foolishly, "Since I am sensible, I will watch my father help the plow. I can do it at the age of 12. It is hard to say if I have been studying for a few years, but farmers can do these jobs. Little General, look at Miss Mu's plowing business, just go forward as usual, just go slower." Fan Zijian gave Chi Heiran a wink. Chi Heiran interpreted it smoothly, and asked casually while pulling forward, "Then who is pulling the plow in your house?" "My cousin and I took turns." "Your family has no cattle?" Fan Zijian asked suspiciously. Zhuang Dai smiled, "Except for rich households, there are very few village households who can afford cattle. Our village is so big and only the village chief's family has one. Other households pull plows." Fan Zijian, "It's really hard work. I never thought about doing other things to change the status quo. For example, doing business, or something. We have high mountains and dangerous roads, what kind of business can we do? We have no capital." Fan Zijian, "I heard that Basehan County is very famous for red dates. You can grow some red dates and ship them to Basehan County for sale. There should be merchants there to buy them." Zhuang Dai shook his head, "The road from our village to Basehan County is even more difficult than the road to Mingshui County." Fan Zijian and Chi Heiran looked at each other, and asked casually, "It's a long walk from your village to Mingshui County, how about going to Basehan County? Are there no other villages on the way?" After a night of rest, Zhuang Dai's vigilance against them has been lowered, and Chi Heiran did bring a military doctor to see his mother last night. What he said was similar to what the doctor at Rengzentang said, and he even took medicine. It was the time when they were full of gratitude, so they answered whatever they asked. After Chi Heiran had walked back and forth 20 times, Fan Zijian and Chi Heiran had roughly grasped the information about that path. Chi Heiran became happy, threw the rope to Mu Yangling, patted his buttocks and left. "I'll go back and ask someone to help you." Chi Heiran disappeared in a flash. Just as Mu Yangling picked up the rope and put it on his body, he ran back in a flash and shouted at Mu Shi, "Mu Shi, return to the camp early." Chi Heiran would only call Mu Shi's name when he was in the army and when he had missions, and Mu Shi could only answer loudly, leaving behind his things and chasing after him. Although one Mushi left, a dozen or so people came soon after. Although they were handicapped, they had all cultivated the land. Except for some difficulties at the beginning, they gradually became proficient. Mu Yangling was concerned about their physical defects, so he let everyone rest for a quarter of an hour. My aunt also knew that Mu Yangling's move was to take care of the soldiers who came to help, so she didn't work, but sat with a few children in the fields, or to check the wheat fields. A few veterans also went to dig the wheat fields. They were farmers before joining the army and had a different feeling for the land. When they turned over the soil, someone exclaimed, "The seeds have sprouted." Mu Yangling jumped up and ran over to have a look. Seeing that the dug-up wheat had sprouted tender shoots, he immediately smiled, "That's great, I don't know what's going on in other places." The veteran who dug up the soil stood up with a smile on his face, "Little girl, I am lucky today, and I will dig another piece for you." "Okay, then let's change places." Mu Yangling took him to dig 3 places in a row, and the wheat seeds inside had germinated, and the smile on the veteran's face couldn't be concealed no matter what. Digging the soil to check the seeds is a matter of good luck. It is obviously very lucky for him to be popular 3 times in a row. He feels that his recent luck must be super good. The good luck of the veteran also made other people jealous, and they all expressed to Mu Yangling that they wanted to enjoy the joy. Mu Yangling didn't know the meaning of this incident, and thought it was just a very common thing. Before the ant could speak, she waved her hand and said, "Go, it's just that the uncles dug it up and buried it for me." "No problem." Everyone found a place and dug it up. Some dug up all the wheat seeds, and some dug only once 3 times. Because there were many places to dig, Mu Yangling also had a certain understanding of the germination of wheat seeds. The veterans more or less dug up the germinated wheat seeds, and they felt happy, and they all became beaming. Because of this matter, Mu Yangling got along with them more harmoniously. In addition, she was a soldier in her previous life and didn't mind their roughness. All the inferior land was planted with corn, and there were still a few caddies of seeds that Mu Yangling put away to see how they grew out. If there were too many seeds, they would be replenished later. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 155. Mu Yangling opened the sack to look, rubbed the light brown seeds, and asked, "Is this the grass seed?" Fan Zijian nodded, "These are enough for you to plant 60 acres of land. Take them back." Mu Yangling asked hesitantly, "This thing is so planted, just sprinkle it." Fan Zijian looked at her seriously, "You think I will understand? Then I'll just scatter it casually. It's grass anyway, so it won't stop growing, right?" Fan Zijian thought for a while and said, "Grass can be seen everywhere, even if it is trampled, it can grow well, so it should be fine to sprinkle it casually." Seeing that he thought the same way, Mu Yangling immediately felt relieved. He picked up the seeds and was about to leave. When he reached the door, he turned around and asked, "Where did Chi Heiran and my father go?" Fan Zijian frowned, "This is a military secret, so don't ask if you shouldn't." Mu Yangling sighed, turned around and left without asking any more questions. On the other hand, Fan Zijian looked at her back in surprise. He thought she would hang around to the end. Mu Yangling has been to the camp twice, Not only can't see her father, Chi Heiran, who must appear every time, also disappeared. She is not a fool, she was a soldier in her previous life, so she naturally knew that after getting Zhuang Daoi's line, they would what to do, but just because I know it, I can't help but ask one more question. Mu Yangling gave up and didn't ask. Fan Zijin became uneasy. After thinking about it, he asked the person who planted corn for Mu Yangling last time to help along with him, so as to see how Mu Yangling was feeling. Those veterans had never planted grass before. Mu Yangling said to sow it directly, and they followed suit. Zai Yuheng also brought Zai Ulan and Bowen to help. A group of people sowed a lot, and they finished the work in one day. Mu Yangling waved goodbye to the veteran and began to patrol the field, kicking away some more grass seeds from time to time. When Malu went to the city to sell the rabbit and heard the news, everything was settled, so she could only stamp her feet and shout, "Why don't you wait for me to come back, you child, aren't you ruining things?" Malu she ran over and lifted Mu Yangling's ears, and asked her to look up at the sky, "Are you planting grass, or feeding birds?" Mu Yangling opened his mouth wide, "Birds eat pasture seeds." Malayashi stared at her. Mu Yangling could only look at Zai Yuheng, and the children all shrunk their hands and listened obediently. Looking at the seeds on the ground, and looking at the pitiful children, even if the ant was so angry that she couldn't speak, she could only turn around and think about remedial measures, and finally said, "While the sky is not yet hay, you and I will go back and make some scarecrows to plug in, and tomorrow you are not allowed to go anywhere, so come here with sticks to chase down the birds that fly down." Mu Yangling looked at the vast 60 mu of land and his feet went limp. Zai Yuheng and the three also looked at Mu Yangling pitifully. Mu Yangling stammered, "Even if birds eat seeds, they probably can't eat much. There are so many lands." Under Maliu's stare, he couldn't say the next words. Mu Yangling can only express that he will definitely come to catch the birds tomorrow. It's just that it rained lightly that night. This was the first spring rain since the beginning of spring this year. Maliu's rice was not in the mood to cook, so he stood under the eaves and looked up at the fine spring rain. He said happily, "It's really amazing. Well, after this spring rain, wheat and rice should be able to grow." Thinking of the grass seeds that were just sown, he said to Mu Yangling happily, "You are lucky, you just happened to meet this spring rain, that's fine, the work in the field can be put down first." Mu Yangling breathed a sigh of relief. It is said that spring rain is as expensive as oil, and Mu Yangling finally has a feeling. This spring rain has been falling intermittently for 2 days. When Mu Yangling went to the field to look again, the wheat seeds had already broken through the soil and jumped out. The pasture seeds also sprouted. The rice in the rice seedling field is already green, and according to my aunt's estimate, it will be ready for transplanting in more than 20 days. Then, before that, Mu Yangling had to drain the water and harrow the land again to turn the land into fields. The 13 mu field required a lot of work. And my aunt thinks that they can cultivate as intensively as possible when they have time, not as rough as growing wheat. 13 mu of land needs to be fertilized. Tomorrow I will ask someone to go to the city to see if I can buy enough fertilizer. Aling, you can just rake the fields. Auntie will do the basic fertilizer. Fertilizer. The ant glared at her, "It's yes Yang. Didn't I tell you last time that it costs 1 penny and 1 bucket? I have to find someone to negotiate the price. It's best to get it down to 1 penny per bucket. Auntie, you won't just pour it into the field when you buy it, will you?" Mu Yangling asked quickly. "Otherwise, what else do you want? You rake it again after pouring it in, so that the fertilizer can be eaten into the field, so that the planted rice will grow well later." Mu Yangling couldn't accept it no matter what, and said, "Let's make it with pond mud like last time. Is this okay? The pond mud I needed last time was just to make up the numbers. This pond mud is hard, not as good as the mud in the field." Mu Yangling said seriously, "Auntie, The pond mud is made of silt agglomeration, which is very nutritious and much better than the mud in the field. This is what the book says. We still use pond mud and night scent to dry it. Let's scatter it in the field later, it's decided like this. Mu Yangling ran away after finishing speaking. Malayashi couldn't stop it at all. Although she had never seen or heard of using pond mud and fertilizer, she no longer objected when she heard Mu Yangling said that she saw it in a book. Just as Mu Yangling ran out, he was blocked by Yan Mo. Miss Mu, my son is looking for you everywhere. Mu Yangling smiled and said, you're talking nonsense again. It's not easy to find me. I'm at home, in the fields or in the mountains, just 3 places. Why do I need to look everywhere? Tell me, what does your son want from me? Yan Mo smiled, skipped the previous question and said directly, my son said that there are more than 100 rabbits accumulated in the camp. When will you be able to take over? Our camp sends out some people to help them go up the mountain every day. You mow the grass, there is a shortage of manpower. Mu Yangling opened his mouth slightly, and turned his head to point to the half-finished shed in the yard. Do you think this shed can hold rabbits? It was agreed at the beginning. I will not take over until my pasture grows up. Now my pasture can hold rabbits, it's sprouting. Yan Mo apologized and said with a smile, Miss Mu, isn't there not enough houses in the camp? After finishing speaking, he lowered his voice and said, you should just help me out. The eldest son didn't know what my young master and 4th young master did. Tomorrow the eldest young master will come to inspect the camp. If you see young master and 4th young master doing these things in the camp, you will not die of anger. Mu Yangling said in disbelief, didn't Chi Heiran ask General Chi to ask for many soldiers who can hunt? How could General Chi not know? The 4th son only said that he wanted them to take people into the mountains to catch hares and make tooth sacrifices for the people in the camp. He didn't say anything about doing business. Now that the food in the camps is tight, the eldest son didn't stop him. Miss Mu, sir, the young master will not agree with the young master and the 4th young master to do business. Wouldn't she be dead? She had to cover it up for them no matter what. Mu Yangling agreed without thinking, but my shed is only half built. How about this? You go back and tell your son, let him send some people over to help me. It can be done in 2 hours, and it will probably clear up tomorrow, and he has to help me build 10 sheds in the pastoral area. Seeing Yan Mo's eyes widened, he said, I don't take advantage of him in vain. It's cheap. How about I give him the rabbits from the 1st pen for free, or just count it as the income of the 5th battalion? This little one has to go back and ask the young master what he means. Go, I'll wait here. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 156. Mu Yangling poured out all the copper coins from the money bag on the Kong, and waved to Zai Yuheng and the others, come here and help me count how much money we have in total. Zai Yuheng looked at the small pile of copper plates on the Kong, and happily climbed up. Cousin, you have a lot of money. Mu Yangling stroked these copper plates gently, and sighed, it won't be mine soon. Bowen also climbed onto the Kong, and asked, sister, do you want to give it to me? Mu Yangling knocked him on the head, you're thinking beautifully, you haven't seen more than 100 rabbits outside, it is expected that there will be little rabbits delivered tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Fan Zijian is not so kind as to eat the grass that the rabbits eat. It was sent by me, so we have to cut the grass by ourselves. It's okay now, there are not many rabbits, and they are small. Zai Yuheng and I can go to the mountain for half an hour every day to get it done, but it will not work in the future, when the sheds in the pastoral area are built. Well, let's put the rabbits there, and there will be at least 1,000 by then, and the pasture will take a long time to grow. Before that, we have to mow the grass ourselves, so I want to pay someone to help. Seeing that so much money belonged to other people, Zai Ulan immediately lay down on the copper plate reluctantly, and shouted, cousin, give me the money, and I will go and cut grass for you. Mu Yangling laughed loudly, patted her buttocks and said, "You are still young, you are not allowed to go up the mountain. I will go with your sister, and you will take Bowen to take care of Bosi and Kijia at home. Now we pay small money, in the future we can make a lot of money back." Mu Yangling wasn't bothered, he counted the copper coins, and felt relieved when he thought it was enough. Fan Zijian had already agreed to her proposal, how could she not agree to such a good thing? At this time, someone has been asked to build a shed for her in the pastoral area in the east. The shed is located in the 60 mu of land. Because it was planned from the beginning, Mu Yangling didn't sow grass seeds in this area, and it was built in a row 1 foot away from the ditch she dug. 9 of them will be used to breed rabbits, and 1 will be used for her to live in, and she will come over from time to take care of the rabbits. There was a lot of movement here, and the Hu family was the first to be alarmed. Because the shed area is on the other side of the Linhe River, it is not adjacent to the Hu family's land, and they don't know the specific situation, but this does not prevent the old man Hu from coming to inquire about the news. The soldiers who built the hut had already been ordered by Fan Zijian, and what they said was that the little general asked Mu Yangling to help him raise rabbits. This is the little general's property. The old man Hu didn't dare to inquire any more when he heard it. Before he arrived at night, everyone in the village knew that Mu Yangling was working for Chi Heiran and raising rabbits. Some envied her, and some felt sorry for her. He didn't dare to provoke her, let alone try to trick those rabbits. The Hu family originally planted pastures on the adjacent land of the Mu family, but now they have no objection at all. After all, pastures were planted on the opposite side, and the seeds would be scattered by the wind in the future, and the land on their side would also be affected, but if the target was changed to Chi Heiran, then everything would be no problem, and no one dared to speak out against it. Mu Yangling doesn't know about these things. She is very busy now, and besides mowing grass, she has to rake the fields every day. When the mud softens and the soil is soft, it is necessary to keep raking the ground and raking out the grass inside. This large paddy field became Mu Yangling's first intensive cultivation. Mrs. Malu stepped on the field and nodded in satisfaction. This level is enough, let's leave it for now, and start transplanting the seedlings when they grow up. By the way, I went to the south to look at the wheat fields just now, and found that the corn has also grown. It's just that it's too rare, one tree here and another. Is there really a harvest like this? Auntie, the corn plants are very tall, we have to leave enough space for it to grow, let it bask in the sun, so that the corn that grows can be big and yield good harvests. It's like Zhuang Dai who grows wheat. If you plant the same seed, it is God's blessing that the corn that grows can form. Mu Yangling sighed secretly in his heart, and couldn't understand why Emperor Sejong didn't say a few more words, telling people how to grow corn, and later generations would not take so many detours, wasting hundreds of years in vain. How did Mu Yangling know that Emperor Sejong himself didn't know how to farm, and he had never even seen anyone farm, and he didn't even have basic agricultural knowledge? Mu Yangling went to see his cornfield and found that it had grown by a third, and he was satisfied. According to this situation, at least half of it could grow. Then I went to see the wheat field. The growth of wheat was also good, at least better than that of the nearby people. The same people who came to check the situation also found this problem, and shouted at Mu Yangling, "Miss Mu, your crops are growing really well, are you getting fat?" Mu Yangling shook his head, "Where did my family get the fat? I planted it for nothing like everyone else." "Then why does it look so much better than ours?" I muttered suspiciously in my heart. Mu Yangling thought for a while and said, "Maybe it's because I plowed the ground once before planting, and the plow was deep enough when planting." The other party stared at her silently for a while, then turned around and left decisively. "The members of the Mu family are all monsters. Do you think everyone is as powerful as them and tireless?" Mu Yangling scratched his head, wondering why the other party left. "Miss Mu," Fei Bai ran over directly, stepping on Mu Yangling's wheat field. Mu Yangling shouted, "Don't step on my wheat." How could Fei Bai control so much? He tiptoed lightly, and ran to Mu Yangling's side in a short while, and said eagerly, "Miss Mu, follow me up the mountain to pick up my young master." As soon as Fei Bai ran close to Mu Yangling, he saw the blood on the corner of his clothes, his eyes narrowed, and he quietly blocked the eyes of the peasants, and asked in a low voice, "What happened?" Fei Bai said anxiously, "I won't be able to tell for a while, Miss Mu, follow me up the mountain first." Mu Yangling glared at him, and said in a low voice, "General Qi is in the 5th Battalion today, you want to die? Hurry up and put away the anxious look on your face." Fei Bai's face turned pale, but a smile appeared on his face in a short while, and the anxious expression on his body disappeared. He glanced at the peasant who kept peeking at them, and said with a loud smile, "Miss Mu, the little general found something in the mountains. The mother tiger, knowing your strength, wanted you to go to the mountain to help, and your father is also there." Mu Yangling also had a smile on his face, and said loudly, "Okay, let's go, but whether we can hit it or not depends on luck." This time, Mu Yangling no longer cared about the wheat field, and took a short cut from the wheat field to the mountain, until he entered the mountain forest, and no one outside could see them. Then Mu Yangling asked anxiously, "What happened? What happened to you, bloody?" Fei Bai didn't hide anymore, wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and said, "Miss Mu, my young master was seriously injured, but this matter cannot be known to others. Did the eldest young master come here alone, or did he bring someone with him?" "He brought the generals from the 1st Battalion, the 3rd Battalion and the 4th Battalion. There are more casual soldiers." "What's the matter?" "Then don't let them notice it. Find the right time to tell the eldest son, Miss Mu, I have to ask you to do this, no matter what, you must hide my son's whereabouts." Fei Bai said with a pale face and red eyes, "My family, the 4th young master, has caused a catastrophe. The reborn wife is farming." Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 157. Mu Yangling was shocked. What trouble did he get into? Why is he still avoiding people? Fei Bai kept his mouth shut and didn't speak. Although Mu Yangling would know sooner or later, at least he couldn't tell her the truth. Qi Heiran and his party were hiding behind a boulder. Seeing that Fei Bai had brought someone back, he rushed out to greet him. He glanced at Mu Yangling and scolded him in a low voice, "Why did you bring her here? You weren't asked to go. Have you seen Mr. Fan?" Fei Bai said with red eyes, "4th young master trusts her, and she is Uncle Mu's daughter. Cousin is too far away, 4th young master can't wait, and there are too many people in the army." Fei Bai looked at him and said, "Now the eldest young master brought several other generals to visit the camp." Bailey glanced at Mu Yangling, turned around and left without saying a word. Fei Bai quickly pulled Mu Yangling to follow. Bailey is Qi Ziyuan's personal bodyguard for Qi Heiran, and he doesn't usually appear by Qi Heiran's side. After all, in this Xingzhou mansion, no one would be foolish enough to offend Qi Heiran. This is the second time Mu Yangling has seen each other. Qi Heiran was lying behind the boulder with a white face like paper. Although his clothes were neat, Mu Yangling could still smell a faint smell of blood, and Mu Shi also sat beside him with a pale face. Mu Yangling looked at him with concern, but did not ask. After all, everyone could see that the most important thing now was Qi Heiran. Mu Yangling squatted beside him and asked, "Where is he hurt?" Fei Bai gasped and said, "I was stabbed in the back and waist, and it hit a critical point. Although the bleeding has stopped temporarily, it's not handled well. Miss Mu, you have to call a doctor for your son quickly, before outsiders can notice it." To the exception. Mu Yangling was worried, "How can I take it out? There are many people working in the field now, and they will be discovered as soon as they go out." Fei Bai was stunned for a moment. "Well, my lord can't delay any longer." Mu Shi raised his head to look at his daughter, and said, "Don't worry about it, Aling, Take the little general out first, we will walk by your side and try to block other people's sight. He looked at Bailey again, and said, you put on the little general's clothes, walk on the left side of Aling, try to keep your figure down. Aling, go and hunt a roe deer, and when you carry the little general out later, carry the roe deer on your shoulders. Fei-Bai and Bailey. Mu Yangling responded, and ran into the forest. She often moves around this area, and she knows best where to hunt animals. At this time, she didn't care about saving effort, and ran directly there, rushing at a roe deer. Past. The frightened roe deer jumped up and wanted to run, but Mu Yangling knocked him down with a fist, and flew back with it on his shoulders. Mu Shi was also injured, and at this moment he was a little unable to exert himself, so he had to let his daughter carry Chi Heiran carefully and walk away. The three of them surrounded Mu Yangling. The tall figure blocked most of her sight, and the small half who saw her would be attracted by the roe deer on her shoulder, but ignored the things she was still holding in her hand. Mu Yangling walked home quickly all the way, and directly carried Chi Heiran to her room and put him on the Kong. Only then did he untie his clothes, and found that his chest had been split open, and blood was slowly oozing out. Fei-Bai looked at it, his eyes turned red, and said, it must have collapsed on the road, the mountain road is too dangerous. Miss Mu, please call the doctor quickly. You guys wait here, you can go in and out, but Bailey must stay in the house. Mu Yangling ran out and saw Shu Wanyang, who was coming out to check the situation when she heard the movement. Pushing into the room, mother, you are sick now, so you can't get off the Kong. I'll go and get a doctor for you. Don't get off the Kong. Shu Wanyang paused and asked, Aling, what are you doing? Is your father back? Mu Yangling nodded and said in a low voice, Mother, the situation is urgent now, so I won't tell you too much. Anyway, now you have to pretend to be sick and deceive everyone except our family. People have been lied to. I'm going to ask the doctor now, you must not go out. Mu Yangling ran out. Shu Wanyang sat on the Kong for a while, and finally lifted the quilt and lay down on the Kong. She was smarter than Mu Yangling imagined, and even because she grew up in a house, she was more careful than anyone else in this kind of matter. So when Mu Yangling rushed back with Pang Kongqing from Rengzhentang, Bowen and Xiaolan were standing on the steps crying with red eyes, and Ziyuheng was also boiling hot water in the kitchen with red eyes. My aunt was running around in Shu Wanyang's room in a hurry. When Mu Yangling ran to the door, she heard her aunt asking her mother anxiously, why are you so shy, child? Let my aunt see where the bloody smell is coming from, and why, so heavy? You want to kill me? Mu Yangling was shocked, and hurriedly opened the door to enter. Shu Wanyang was lying on the Kong, and when she saw her daughter dragging a doctor in, she hurriedly waved her hand to indicate that she was fine. Mu Yangling breathed a sigh of relief, and went to his room after pulling the doctor away. The aunt grabbed the doctor and shouted, Doctor, you must be my uncle, my niece, and daughter-in-law. Although she has been in poor health, she has never bled so much. You have to help her. Pang Kongqing, who was still anxious, saw something was wrong, and looked at Mu Yangling suspiciously. Mu Yangling waved to his aunt, and said in a low voice, Auntie, just call like that, I'll take the doctor to my room. The aunt's eyes widened, why? Only after uttering two words, Shu Wanyang covered her mouth nimbly, and said in a low voice, Auntie, the husband is back. The aunt pulled off her hand, seeing that something was wrong, she also lowered her voice and said, I know she is back, isn't he sitting outside? Thinking of Mu Shi's unusually pale face, his face changed slightly, and he looked at Pang Kongqing, looked at Mu Yangling suspiciously, this is the doctor you invited for Shitu. Shu Wanyang didn't know, but she didn't intend to ask her daughter, she just pulled her aunt and said, Auntie, let's leave it alone, my stomach hurts, please help me bring a basin of hot water. This is naturally an excuse, Malu thought after thinking about it, I went. Mu Yangling pulled Pang Kongqing to go to her room. Pang Kongqing hurried to break free from her, but found that the opponent's hand was so strong that he couldn't pull it out. His expression changed, and he said, "Miss Mu, I only agreed to help you. Mother went to see a doctor, but she didn't agree to anything else." Mu Yangling lowered his voice and threatened him, "Mr. Dada, you have come here and heard things you shouldn't have heard. Do you think you can go?" Pang Kongqing was annoyed, "You threaten me? Don't forget that I am a doctor." Mu Yangling sneered, "Mr. Dada is alone." Seeing his face change slightly, Mu Yangling said, "Don't worry, Mr. Dada, it's just that my cousin is inconvenient to go to your clinic. Is the consultation fee okay? You will be missed. Although he is a person who licks blood on the tip of a knife, he is also the most faithful. You have cured him, the benefits are not small, and he will definitely not trouble you for such a trivial matter." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 158. Pang Kongqing was still pale, and looked at Mu Yangling suspiciously. Your cousin is a bandit." As soon as the words came out, Pang Kongqing wanted to bite off his tongue, and he knew that he shouldn't have too much curiosity. Mu Yangling glanced at him with a half-smile, picked up a quick stone at the door and threw it, and crushed it in his hands. Pang Kongqing stared at her dumbfounded, and Mu Yangling said calmly, "Our Mu family ancestors have the blood of Hu people, so they are stronger, so we can live more comfortably on this knife edge, but my mother doesn't like my father's tricks. These, Mr. Dada, our Mu family is very loyal. You are the bandits in Deluo Mountain." Pang Kongqing had only heard that there was a group of bandit leaders in Deluo Mountain who had Hu blood. Could it be that this cousin was the son of the bandit leader? Pang Kongqing didn't dare to delay now. The bandits in Deluo Mountain were the most fierce. Offending them, sneaking into Mingshui County to wash Pang's family bloody is not impossible. Seeing Pang Kongqing obediently following Mu Yangling to her house, Xu Wanyang and her aunt breathed a sigh of relief. At this time, Fei Bai had already hidden. Only Bailey looked at Pang Kongqing coldly with a straight face and a sword lying on his lap. Pang Kongqing fought for a while, and Mu Yangling hurriedly comforted him, "Don't worry Mrs. Pang, this is my cousin's servant. He won't do anything to you. Come and have a look." Chi Heiran had already been briefly put on makeup by Bailey, and even covered his face with a veil at this time. This concealment seemed to be for people to recognize him. Suspicion flashed across Pang Kongqing's eyes, but he had to calm down to feel his pulse. But he heard two children outside whispering, "My cousin is so pitiful, I won't be able to come to the city to play in the future." "No, my cousin said that he has covered his face, no one will see him, and my cousin can come to the city to play with us in the future." Mu Yangling obviously also heard the voice. After taking a look at Pang Kongqing, he went out and tore the children apart. Through the window, Pang Kongqing couldn't hear her scolding the children clearly, but at this time, looking at the veil on the patient's face, he no longer has the desire to explore, and he even hopes that the veil will be more stable, but it must not fall off, otherwise, if he sees the true face of the bandit's beloved son, he will really die without a place to bury him. Mu Yangling took Ziyuheng and Bowen's hands and walked to the kitchen, then squatted in front of them and touched their heads and said, "You are doing well. When your brother Heiran wakes up, I will ask him to buy you delicious food." Ziyuheng was so nervous that her palms were sweating. She was only a few months younger than Mu Yangling, and she was already fully sensible at this time. She naturally knew the seriousness of this matter. She only hoped that Chi Heiran could get through it safely, as long as she didn't die in their family is good, otherwise their family will ask him to be implicated to death. Bowen was still ignorant, and said in a puzzled way, "Just now, my cousin and I were playing by the field, and I saw brother Heiran and the others leaving. Why did they come back in the blink of an eye? It turned out that Xu Huanyang discovered that the whole thing was a loophole after Mu Yangling left, so she could only let Qi Heiran stop the bleeding, and at the same time let Bailey continue to pretend that Qi Heiran and Fei Bai left their house and went back to the military camp. When everyone can't see the mouth, I changed clothes and sneaked back from the north. The area is full of bushes and it is easy to cover up my whereabouts. And it was she who frightened Bowen and Xiaolan to cry, and no one expected that my aunt would come back so early today, and she would come here with Hu Fangxi. Get into your pants and pretend you're seriously ill. Hu Fangxi was deceived, but even his aunt was frightened. As long as these things are carefully investigated now, clues can still be found, but at least ordinary people will not find abnormalities. Mu Yangling sighed, went out to see his pale father helping him into the kitchen, and asked in a low voice, "Father, where are you hurt?" Mu Shi exhaled, and said, "There are a few wounds, all of which have stopped bleeding, and I will ask your mother to give me medicine later. The important thing now is the little general. Aling, you will hold the doctor for a while. If the little general is not out of danger, don't let him leave before now." Mu Shi took out a bag of silver from his bosom and stuffed it into her hand, and said in a low voice, "Use this to catch the medicine in a while, be sure to catch it well, and find a way to secretly inform Mr. Fan and the general. You can't hide this matter from them. The little general has caused a big disaster, you have to make up for it as soon as possible, otherwise, I'm afraid it will affect the whole Dazhu." Mu Yangling opened his mouth wide. What kind of trouble did Qi Heiran cause to involve the whole country? There was a sound in the room. Mu Yangling looked back, and saw Bailey was half hidden looking towards the side, hurried over and asked, "What's wrong?" Bailey looked at Pang Kongqing. Pang Kongqing had just checked the wound on the patient's body, wiped the cold sweat off his forehead, glanced at Bailey, and said to Mu Yangling, "I don't know if I can save it because it's hurt to a vital point." As soon as he changed, he looked at him fiercely, and hurriedly said, "But I will try my best, but if he has a fever or the wound is inflamed, then there is no good way for me, I can only resign myself to fate." Then ask Mr. Dede to write a prescription. It's easy to say, easy to say. Pang Kongqing was afraid of offending Bailey, and hurriedly said, "I'll write him 2 prescriptions, one for internal use and one for external application. How about doing both?" Listen to Mr. Dede. Pang Kongqing just wanted to finish writing the prescription quickly and leave, so he wrote it with all his heart, and even explained it to Mu Yangling, who read the prescription, and finally even added a sentence habitually, "These medicinal materials are available in the pharmacy." Pang Kongqing wanted to bite off his tongue again. However, Mu Yangling had already folded up the prescription and put it in his arms, and said to Pang Kongqing, who was looking at her expectantly, "Mr. Dede, my mother is seriously ill, and you have to work hard tonight. You will stay here for one night. I will wait for my mother to leave tomorrow. If your life is in danger, I will send you away." Instead of looking at Pang Kongqing's unbelievable eyes, Mu Yangling directly ordered Bailey, "Let Dr. Dede rest in my room. You look at him and be polite to the doctor." Bailey glanced at Pang Kongqing and nodded. Pang Kongqing could only watch Mu Yangling leave. He turned his head stiffly to look at Bailey, smiled stiffly, and said, "Hello, please take care of me, brother." Bailey glanced at him coldly, then turned around and sat down on the stool next to him. Pang Kongqing could only turn his head to look at the patient, but the person lying on the bed was still awake, so he could only look at Bailey, who was constantly releasing air conditioning, wishing for the first time that Mu Yangling would come back soon. Mu Yangling ran all the way into the county, but instead of going to Rengzentang to grab the medicine, he changed to another pharmacy. The shopkeeper who picked up the medicine didn't think too much, and just followed the prescription to grab it for Mu Yangling. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 159. Mu Yangling hurriedly sent the medicine back to Fei Bai, who was hiding in the kitchen, to let him make the medicine. At this moment, He pushed his father to Xu Wanyang's room and handed the medicine to her. "Mom, give me the medicine, come on, I'll go out for a while." Mu Yangling went to the camp to find Qi Xiaoyuan and Fan Zijin. Qi Xiaoyuan only stays here for one day, now she can still find excuses to get past him when she goes to find him, but it will be difficult to go to him again when he returns to Fukin. After all, it is too revealing. Qi Xiaoyuan came here because Qi Heiran asked him to fight on a whim some time ago, and the generals below coaxed him to come over to see the results of Qi Heiran's military training. If he can really be like the 4th Battalion back then there is nothing wrong with agreeing to him to fight. This is something to make his younger brother look good. Qi Xiaoyuan happily agreed, and the recent battle with Jinbing has also come to an end, so he brought a group of people over. It's just that everyone seems to be unlucky. Qi Heiran took people into the mountains to hunt, and I'm afraid they won't come out in 3 or 5 days. Fan Zijin smiled and explained to everyone, Haoran is full of energy, because now everyone not only has to train soldiers, but also build camps. He is free here, and just heard that there are wild animals coming down the mountain to spoil the food, so he brought a few people into the mountain. Last time he went into the mountain and stayed for 4 days before coming out, and this time he doesn't know how long he will stay, Fan Zijin said with a helpless smile, so this time I'm afraid I'll disappoint everyone, and we can't let everyone parade. Qi Xiaoyuan glanced at his cousin, but said nothing. Zhang Ziyi said with a smile, "What's the matter? At worst, we will come again next time." Looking at this camp, you can see that the little general has put a lot of thought into it. It is much neater than our old camps. With Zhang Ziyi and Fan Zijin in the active atmosphere, everyone gradually forgot that Qi Heiran was not in the camp. Qi Xiaoyuan took everyone to play for a day, and finally saw that the sky was getting better, so he got up and smiled, "Okay, we should go back too." Fan Zijin hurried to stay with the guests. "Cousin, why don't you stay here for dinner with all the generals, and everyone should also taste the food of our 5th Battalion." Zhang Ziyi twitched his lips, thinking he would invite them to a restaurant in Mingshui County, which shows that Fan Zijin didn't want to keep them. Qi Xiaoyuan's eyes darkened, and he glanced at Fan Zijin calmly, then shook his head and said, "No need, so many generals can't stay outside overnight, everyone has to go back today. It's just that a group of people heard the noise before they reached the gate of Wuying." Qi Xiaoyuan faintly heard the crying, and couldn't help frowning. What's going on in front? Fan Zijin's heart skipped a beat. He recognized Mu Yangling's voice. How could Mu Yangling cry? She didn't cry when she crawled out of the dead, and she knew that her cousin would come today, but she promised him that she would help him cover it up. Zhang Ziyi had already strode out. Seeing Mu Yangling crying with a soldier at the gate of the camp, he couldn't help being taken aback, and shouted, "Miss Mu, what's wrong with you?" Mu Yangling wiped away tears, pushed away the soldier and ran to Qi Xiaoyuan's side. "General Qi, please save my mother." "Your mother?" Qi Xiaoyuan looked at her in surprise. "What's wrong with your mother?" "My mother is sick, and I urgently need good ginseng, but my family has no money and no channels, so I can't afford good ginseng. General, please help me, save my mother." Mu Yangling stretched out his hand to grab Qi Xiaoyuan, tightening her fingers, she tapped his wrist lightly. Qi Xiaoyuan glanced at her calmly, and sighed, "I don't have any good ginseng here, but it doesn't matter, I'll ask someone to go back and look for it." Then he looked at Zhang Ziyi and said, "You take all the soldiers back first, then let the housekeeper go to the warehouse to find the century-old ginseng, and bring it here immediately." He said gently to Mu Yangling, "Ms. Mu, don't worry, I'll go and have a look with you. If it doesn't work, I'll post a post to invite someone from Fukin. The famous doctor is here." Mu Yangling wiped away tears again, and looked at Qi Xiaoyuan gratefully. Fan Zijin immediately said, "I'll go and have a look too." Qi Xiaoyuan nodded, "Bring the military doctor along." Yan Mo ran away, and after a while, The military doctor came out with a medicine box on his back, and the four of them rode on the horse. Qi Xiaoyuan smiled and stretched out his hand to Mu Yangling. "Come here, I will take you." Mu Yangling directly extended his hand to him and sat behind his back. Qi Xiaoyuan rushed to Zhang Ziyi, who was under him, waved his horse and rushed out. After the horse ran a long way, Mu Yangling made sure that no one would hear their words, and then whispered in Qi Xiaoyuan's ear, "General, Qi Heiran was seriously injured, is lying in my house now." Fei Bai said that he caused a catastrophe, absolutely no one should know that he was injured. Qi Xiaoyuan's expression darkened, and he asked, "How is he now?" "Still asleep, hurt the vitals." Qi Xiaoyuan speeded up the horse silently. Fan Zijin followed a few steps behind the two of them, and he couldn't hear what the two were saying, but he had an intuition that this matter had something to do with Qi Heiran. Thinking of Qi Heiran directly going deep into the enemy's hinterland this time, he couldn't help but worry, maybe something happened to that silly boy. The horse stopped at Mu's house. Qi Xiaoyuan hurried in. Mu Shi rushed out from the house. Qi Xiaoyuan only took a glance at him and smelled the smell of blood and medicine on his body, nodded slightly at him, and asked in a low voice, "What about him?" Mu Yangling had already run in from the outside. Qi Xiaoyuan said, "General, thank you for coming to see my mother. You can do it here first. Directly invite him to his room." As soon as people entered the room, Bailey knelt down in front of Qi Xiaoyuan. Qi Xiaoyuan didn't even look at him, and sat on the edge of the Kong to look at the sleeping Qi Heiran. At this time, Fei Bai had already applied the medicine for Qi Heiran, wrapped in a white cloth, lying on the bed lifelessly, with a pale face. Qi Xiaoyuan looked at him deeply for a while, then turned his head to look at Bailey, with anger creeping in his eyes. Mu Shi and Bailey knelt at Qi Xiaoyuan's feet, not daring to say a word. Even though Mu Yangling felt sorry for his father, he didn't dare to speak at this moment. Fan Zijin followed Qi Xiaoyuan into the house, saw Qi Hao on the Kong, and then swayed, and managed to stand still by holding onto the doorframe. He tremblingly touched his nose, and was relieved when Qi Xiaoyuan slapped him away. Looking at him with red eyes, "Cousin, is Heiran still alive?" "Of course he's alive," Qi Xiaoyuan growled with suppressed anger. "If he dares to die, I'll go to the palace of Hades and bring him back." Fan Zijin sat paralyzed on the edge of the Kong, while Qi Xiaoyuan said to Yan Mo, "Go and invite the military doctor in. You go out and guard the gate, no one is allowed to peep. When an accident happened to the Mu family today, those in the village who are tongue-in-cheek and curious would stand and watch from a distance. Dare to reveal the reason." Naturally, Qi Xiaoyuan also knew her concerns, and directly asked Yan Mo to stand up. The country people are afraid of power, and no matter how curious they are when they see Yan Mo, they dare not get close to peeping. It is convenient for them to ask questions. At least now Qi Xiaoyuan is very relieved. Kick Bailey away, let him fall to the corner and make a bang without worrying about people outside hearing it. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 160. Mu Yangling touched his chest calmly, feeling the pain. Mu Shitu was even lower, kneeling respectfully. After being kicked away, Bailey got up and knelt down again, keeping his head down and not daring to speak. The military doctor sat on the stool and took Qi Heiran's pulse, as if he didn't see it all. After taking the pulse, he checked the wounds on Qi Heiran's body, got up and saluted Qi Xiaoyuan. "General, the little general is seriously injured." "I'm afraid I can't catch it." Seeing Qi Xiaoyuan's face was ugly, he said, "The little general has injured his vitals, and he can be sent to the Tongxin Hall of Xinyuan Mansion in the end. Please Dr. Liu, maybe he can save him." Bailey's expression changed, he raised his head to look at Qi Xiaoyuan. Qi Xiaoyuan asked, "If you don't send it to Xinyuan Mansion, what if you just rule in Xingzhou Mansion?" The military doctor paused, thought for a while, and said, "Then we can only ask Pang Kongqing from Rengzentang to help. Although he is young, his research on internal diseases is far better than others, which makes him understand the internal organs better than others, and external injuries. Now, I think I still have a hand, and I am 70% sure that the wound of the little general will not be inflamed. Chi Ziyuan waved his hand and said, "You go out and wait first, and I'll ask later." Bailey said in a low voice, "General, Pang Kongqing is in the next room, why don't you ask the military doctor to go to the kitchen to look at the boiled concoction?" Chi Ziyuan was annoyed. What kind of trouble did his younger brother cause to be so cautious? Looking at his younger brother on the bed, Chi Ziyuan was really annoyed and distressed, and finally his anger was transferred to Bailey, and he asked in a cold voice, "I asked you to protect him, not for you to take him on an adventure." Bailey's face was pale, he lowered his head and dared not speak. Chi Ziyuan waved his hand and told the military doctor to go to the kitchen to look at the concoction. The military doctor also knew that this move was to let him hide his whereabouts, and try not to let Pang Kongqing in the next room find out. In fact, Pang Kongqing couldn't find it at all, because he was being tied to the pillar by Bailey. Not only his mouth was gagged, but his eyes were blindfolded. If it didn't work, Bailey wanted to plug his ears. He only heard a lot of footsteps at the beginning, knowing that someone was coming again, and then there was a loud bang, as if something had hit the wall. Now Pang Kongqing just wanted to play dead, but he wanted to call for help, but came from outside. The person in charge doesn't know who it is. What if it's an accomplice? It doesn't matter if he dies, but don't implicate his wife, children, and family in the end. Pang Kongqing really regretted it to death. He shouldn't have come here just because he saw Mu Bowen's cuteness, but his doctor's parents thought that even if Mu Yangling didn't come to invite him, other people would still come to invite him. Pang Kongqing was thinking wildly here, while Chi Ziyuan was asking Bailey what was going on there. Bailey looked up at Mu Yangling and Fan Zijian. Fan Zijian sat blankly without moving. He was concentrating on Chi Heiran. He was always clever and clever, but he didn't see Bailey's hint. Besides, he would not leave even if he saw it. New. This time, he and Heiran had perfected the plan to sneak into Base Han County from Sipan village to investigate the enemy's situation. But Mu Yangling got up and wanted to leave. Chi Ziyuan glanced at Mu Shi, waved his hand to stop her, and said, "You stay, Zijian is my family, but you are also someone Heiran trusts." It is still unclear what Heiran provoked. "What's the matter? Bailey is not young. I'm afraid he will have to cover up with Mu Yangling in the future. Anyway, her father knows the truth, so it's better to tell her too." Chi Ziyuan didn't treat Mu Yangling like a child, but felt that she was more reliable than Mu Shi. Although this was an intuition, Chi Ziyuan believed that he would never ignore any of his intuitions. But Chi Ziyuan thought of all kinds of things, but he never thought that his younger brother would get into such a disaster. Bailey was sure that there were only a few of them in the house, and there was no one in the yard outside, and there was Yanmo guarding outside, so he whispered, "General, the little general killed the Prince of Jin, Wuben, in Hanshong Mansion." Chi Ziyuan's eyes couldn't help shrinking, his hands instantly grasped his clothes, and he looked at him in shock. Fan Zijian also opened her eyes wide and turned her head, and almost twisted her neck because she moved too fast. On the contrary, Mu Yangling was the calmest. In her eyes, Prince Jin is just a symbol. In this troubled world, even the emperor, maybe he will be captured and kill a prince. Seeing that Chi Ziyuan and Fan Zijian were silent, Mu Yangling could only ask in a low voice, "Then have your identities been discovered?" Bailey shook his head, "We were dressed as barbarians in Hanshong Mansion." At that time, there was a sudden conflict. After the little general killed him, he looked at the things on his body and found out that he was the Prince of Jin. We retreated almost immediately, but it was still discovered, and it took a lot of blood to escape. "General, this matter must not be discovered. Jingguo has the ambition to invade my Great Zhou. If this matter is exposed, then the little general." Bailey looked anxiously at Chi Ziyuan. Fan Zijin also knelt down in front of Chi Xiuyuan with a plop, hugged his leg and said, "Cousin, save Heiran quickly." I agreed for him to go there, you know he always listens to me, so you just say I did it of. Chi Xiuyuan slapped him and said bitterly, "What do you think I'm going to do? Heiran is my own younger brother. If you take the blame for this crime, he can keep him." With the pissing nature of the people in Linen Mansion, the Chi family, the Fan family, the 9 clans, none of them can be kept. Fan Zijin's face was pale. Mu Yangling couldn't help but stared at them dumbfounded, and couldn't help but said, "Didn't Bailey say that they still found out our identities? Then just clean up the tail and let them do it themselves." Mu Yangling, use your brains, think of the ones often played in TV dramas, combine your previous exercises with the battle of wits and courage of drug lords, and say, for example, you can give fake products to other princes of Jin Kingdom, such as the eldest prince, the second prince and the third prince. If you have the ambition to fight for the reserve, you can blame anyone, and Xiaoguo next door. Didn't Xiaoguo take the opportunity to come down to fight Kogu in the last battle with Jin Bing? They are also bad people, so let them pinch each other. Anyway, Jin Xia, the 2 countries also border each other, and they are on the same level, which is more convenient than our communication with the kingdom of Jin. Seeing that Chi Xiuyuan's face was still ugly, he said, "In any case, in their eyes, the Han people are weak chickens, with little material resources and cowardice. Talking big and turning around is completely useless. I don't think Hu people will suspect that we did it. Even if we stand up and say that we killed the Prince of Jin, they will not believe it. Instead, they should be wary of him. It is an excuse to attack our dojo." Only then did Chi Xiuyuan look at Mu Yangling with amazement in his eyes. Fan Zijin's eyes were also bright. He grabbed Chi Xiuyuan's robe and said, "Mu Yangling is right, cousin, let's do what Mu Yangling said." Chi Xiuyuan glared at him, pulled him up, stood up and bowed to Mu Yangling, bowed deeply, "Thank you, Miss Mu." He looked deeply at Mu Yangling, and said with a smile, "Speaking of it, Ms. Mu has shown great kindness to all 3 of us. This time I saved our 3 brothers again. I am really grateful. Ms. Mu can come to me for anything in the future, even Zijin. As long as we can do it, it will definitely help you achieve it." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 161. It was the first time someone said such solemn words to Mu Yangling, and she waved her hands in a panic. "No, no, Heiran is my friend, and it's right to do something for a friend, and this matter is also related to my father, he is his subordinate, and it is my father's responsibility to protect Chi Heiran." A smile and admiration flashed across Chi Xiuyuan's eyes, which showed that he was very satisfied with Mu Yangling. When Bailey saw this, he boldly stepped forward and said, "General, this time I was able to escape from the Hanshong mansion by protecting the little general. Thanks to Mu Yangling, the flag blocked most of the pursuers." Chi Xiuyuan lowered his head to look at him. Only then did he see Mu Shi, who was kneeling on the ground. He quickly reached out to help him up, patted his hand and said, "Your father and daughter are very well. I really have to trouble you this time. You are also injured. Go and rest, as long as Aling is here." Chi Xiuyuan turned Miss Mu into Aling with a single sentence, and got closer to her a lot. Mu Shi glanced at his daughter, bowed in response, and slowly withdrew. Chi Xiuyuan turned his head to look at his younger brother. If it was other matters, he could still take the risk of taking his younger brother to Xinyuan Mansion for medical treatment, but now, if he is not careful, he and his younger brother may be lost forever, and even more so, his younger brother will be burdened with everything infamy, so now I can only follow the second plan of the military doctor. Chi Xiuyuan asked Mu Yangling, "What rhetoric did you use when you invited Pang Kongqing?" Mu Yangling scratched his head, and embarrassedly explained everything about how he threatened Pang Kongqing. Chi Ziyuan was taken aback for a moment, then glanced at her appreciatively, and said, "This is a good idea. There are 6 villages and 8 gangs in Deluo Mountain, and the leader of Hushan village, which ranks 3rd, happens to be of barbarian blood. Pang Kongqing must not have seen it I passed that person, let alone know his situation, so he mistook Heiran for being from Hushan Zai. I will make another arrangement and try to clean up the tale. Heiran will be with you for a few days until he leaves. I'll pick him up and leave if he's in danger." Mu Yangling patted his chest and assured, "General, don't worry, I will definitely take good care of Chi Heiran." Chi Ziyuan nodded with a smile. He lowered his head to look at Chi Heiran, and sighed slightly. Seeing this, Mu Yangling was about to retreat quietly. Bailey knelt on the ground and did not dare to move. There were only 3 brothers left in the room. Bailey broke away from Mu Yangling, his face turned dark, but he still cupped his hands and "Thank you, Miss Mu." "You're welcome." Mu Yangling looked around and said worriedly, "Are so many of you going to stay here overnight?" Their house only has these few rooms, so it's fine to keep Chi Heiran and Bailey, just pack them up and live in one room, but Pang Kongqing can't stay in my aunt's room all the time, it's best to rush to her room too, and then the military doctor lived in the utility room, and the whole family could live in the main house, but if Chi Ziyuan and Fan Zijin also stayed, and they couldn't meet Pang Kongqing, there would be no place to settle them down. Mu Yangling was only worried, and Fei Bai had already come over and bowed respectfully. "Miss Mu, my eldest son said that tonight he will just spend the night in the utility room, so you don't have to be restrained. We will hide later and let Pangda husband, let the young master have a look." "What an embarrassment, the general should live in the big house," Mu Yangling said apologetically. Fei Bai laughed softly and said, "Miss Mu, you don't need to be polite to my eldest son, it's just to avoid that one, the eldest son and cousin will leave in a while, and come back quietly when it gets dark. The key is that the eldest son and the cousin must guard the 4th son." After Chi Heiran was injured, he was dragged by Mu Shi and fled into the forest. He originally took 9 people out, but only 4 of them survived, and the other 6 died while protecting him. The past 3 days were not happy. Typing, Chi Heiran's injuries have also worsened. According to Pang Kongqing, today he has reached his limit. If he can survive, everything will be fine. So Chi Ziyuan and Fan Zijin will definitely guard Chi Heiran. Of course, Mu Yangling was watching too. There was such a time bomb in the house, and no one was in the mood to eat, but my aunt did some simple cooking. After feeding the children, she went into her room, hugged a quilt and went out. When Pang Kongqing heard someone entering the room, he yelled twice, and his aunt couldn't help but glanced at him, feeling a little uneasy in her conscience, but she turned her head cruelly, picked up the quilt slightly trembling, and left. When the general said that, "You really plan to let him live in the utility room? How can he live there in such a humid place? Let's live in my room. Our family will deal with it in your mother's room for one night." As soon as the sun went down, Chi Ziyuan took Fan Zijin, who had reddish eyes, and left under the watchful eyes of the villagers. After returning to the barracks, he didn't immediately turn around and go back to Mu's house. Shen, after it was completely dark, he picked up a box on the table and left again with Fan Zijin. "This is the 100-year-old ginseng sent by Zhang Zi. It was originally an excuse, but unexpectedly it will be used. It is not used on Mu's mother, but on his younger brother." Thinking of his always lively and active younger brother suddenly becoming like that, Chi Ziyuan really hated and angry, hated the barbarians, hated himself even more, knowing that his younger brother was unreliable, but still transferred him here alone, not taking good care of him. This is exactly the opposite of what I said when I quarreled with my father when I wrote a letter. My brother will be 10 times and 100 times better here than in Linen Mansion. Fan Zijian turned his head and saw his cousin's complexion was not good, so he knew that he had a knot in his heart, so he pulled his sleeve and begged, "Big cousin, don't be angry and blame yourself, otherwise Heiran will definitely not be able to recover from his injuries when he wakes up. I don't blame him for this matter. If it wasn't for that bald grass that disregarded human life and didn't treat me as a human being, Heiran wouldn't have killed him so impulsively." Chi Xiuyuan sighed, "I've already contacted General Yuan. He has more contacts in Jin Kingdom and Xia Kingdom than we do. We still need his help to sow dissension." Fan Zijian was taken aback, and hurriedly said, "Big cousin, how can you tell outsiders about this?" In Fan Zijian's view, Bailey was given to his cousin by his uncle, and the deed of prostitution was also in the hands of his cousin. Mu Yangling is naturally one of his own, and the military doctors are completely controlled by them, so it's nothing to know, but General Yuan has a high position and authority. Although he is high-minded, Fan Zijian still can't trust him, fearing that one day he will have a choice in conflicts, they will be sacrificed. Chi Xiuyuan naturally knew Fan Zijian's thoughts. He smiled slightly, touched his head, and said, "My cousin is not stupid. Of course I will not tell him what Heiran did, but I just said that my people found that Prince Jin was killed in Hanzhong. Kill, what he wants to think is his business." The Hanzhong mansion was on alert, and the entire Jin army was mobilized. It is impossible for General Yuan to know everything, but whether he can find out the news of the death of the Prince of Jin depends on his own ability. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 162. Mu Yangling and Bailey escorted Pang Kongqing to take care of Chi Heiran in the room. Seeing that Bailey and Pang Kongqing were tired, Mu Yangling went out to move a few benches and put them together, and simply spread a quilt on the top. He said to Pang Kongqing, "Mr. Pang, you can lie down here and have a rest." Pang Kongqing really wanted to have the guts to stare at Mu Yangling and then refuse, but he couldn't bear the drowsiness at all, so he could only snort coldly in his heart, climbed up with a cold face, pulled up the quilt and covered it. In order to anger Mu Yangling, he deliberately, without taking off his shoes, he put his feet directly under the quilt. The quilt was half covered by him like this, and I'm afraid it won't be used in the future, but Mu Yangling didn't seem to notice it, and whispered to Bailey, "You also have a rest, I'll watch him." Bailey protected Chi Heiran and fled for 3 days. His body was already at its limit, and he didn't refuse when he heard the words. He just leaned against the wall and closed his eyes to rest. Mu Yangling sat on the edge of the Kong with his chin propped up and looked at Chi Heiran. Because of excessive blood loss, even after taking the medicine, his face is still pale. Mu Yangling looked at him blankly, which made him feel strange. Chi Heiran seems to be only 13 years old now, and he can already affect the diplomacy of several countries. Up. Mu Yangling poked him in the face and sighed. In fact, Chi Heiran was not to blame. She would have made a move. "I heard that the Prince of the Kingdom of Jin has killed more than 40 beautiful children. If you don't meet them, it can still be regarded as a legend and has nothing to do with the matter, but when you see it, you can't ignore it." Chi Heiran's actions saved the 20 or so children. Chi Heiran suddenly developed a fever in the middle of the night, and Pang Kongqing had to get up to help him apply needles to cool down, and Mu Yangling kept changing the wet handkerchief for him. In the end, the wet veil had to be changed within a quarter of an hour after it was put on. Even the military doctor didn't care to hide it. He changed his clothes and covered his head and face to help. Pang Kongqing didn't have the extra brain capacity to think about this sudden appearance. He didn't care who the person was, and he didn't care who the person was wandering outside the door. He only knew that this person was so valued by this group of people. If he died, he might not be able to live. In the end, Pang Kongqing saw that the veil didn't work at all, so he said, "Go to the well to get fresh water. It's late at night, and the water temperature should be low," and muttered, "It would be great if there was ice. Impossible, Xinzhou Prefecture is not very hot in summer, so there is no habit of storing ice cubes, and large households seldom use ice. Mu Yangling was shocked, and said, I have ice in my house, which is river ice preserved in winter. Pang Kongqing stomped, then why are you still standing there? Go and get it. Mu Yangling took a basin and ran to the backyard, opened the cellar, couldn't wait for the air to pour in, and climbed down directly holding her breath. The air conditioning went straight to Mu Yangling's bones. She didn't care, just squatted down and dug to a piece of ice, and then stuck his head out of the cellar and took a deep breath. Seeing this, Fan Zijian ran over and asked in a low voice, how's it going? Did you get it? Mu Yangling leaned over and handed the basin to him. Fan Zijian picked it up and ran away. Qi Ziyuan saw him running, knocked on the door hurriedly. The military doctor came out and brought it in. Pang Kongqing's mind was completely attracted by Qi Heiran at this time. He didn't care at all pay attention to the outside and see that his face is still covered with a veil, so he turned his head and said to Bailey, we can't put a veil on him anymore, we have to let him breathe smoothly. It won't be of much use, you guys go to boil the medicine, and use ice to cool him down by the way, just cover my eyes. Pang Kongqing was not at all curious about his appearance, seeing him would kill him, and no amount of curiosity disappeared. Bailey didn't talk nonsense, directly blindfolded the man's eyes, and lifted the veil on Qi Heiran's face. At this time, his face was flushed, his breathing was heavy, and it was like iron and carbon when he touched it. Bailey's eyes turned red, anxious look to the medic. The military doctor shook his head slightly, there was nothing he could do now. Mu Yangling ran in, helped break the ice and applied it on his head, and wiped his palms and feet with cold water to cool him down. Mu Yangling sweated a lot after he was busy, and Qi Heiran's body temperature dropped slightly. The military doctor shook his head, lowered his voice and said, this is no good. If the temperature doesn't drop, people will become idiots even if they are saved. This temperature can cook an egg. Of course Mu Yangling knew it too, and judging by the situation, he was lucky to be a fool. If the burning continued like this, people would have to be burned to death. Mu Yangling was in a hurry, and finally remembered something, and said, wine, use wine, who of you has wine with a temperature of about 35 degrees? What is 35 degrees? The military doctor turned to her and asked her. Mu Yangling couldn't take care of it anymore, thinking of the old man who said last time that his family used to make wine, and there were still several jars of good wine passed down from ancestors at home. When his grandson got married, he would take out a jar as a betrothal gift, because of this he showed off several times. Mu Yangling rushed out without even thinking about it, rushed directly to old man Hu's house, and grabbed him who was sleeping soundly. The Hu family shocked Mu Yangling, and the old man almost rolled off the Kong. When he saw that it was Mu Yangling, he asked angrily, Aling, it's midnight, what are you doing? Grandpa Hu, where's your wine? Why do you want my wine? Old man Hu asked her in a daze. Mu Yangling took out a piece of silver from his pocket and put it in front of his eyes. My family needs wine urgently, where is your wine? The old man Hu rolled his eyes, and wanted to sit on the ground and raise the price. He was about to shake his head, but his wife pushed him down. Seeing Mu Yangling's anxious face, Hu Fang knew that she was in urgent need. Thinking of the news that Xu Wanyang was seriously ill, afraid of rumors that he would not survive for a few days, he hurriedly got off the Kong and said, the old man is buried in the cellar, I will take you to get it. Mu Yangling could naturally see what the old man was thinking. Although he was annoyed, it was not the time to care about it. He showed a grateful smile to Hu Fangji, and followed her away. Hey, wait a minute, the old man Hu got up and chased after him, shouting, this wine is inherited from our family, and it is not easy to sell. Aling, don't bully us ordinary people just because you are Zioki's daughter. The old man Hu moved quickly, 3 steps in parallel and 2 steps in front of the cellar. Mu Yangling was furious, but the thing belonged to someone else, so she couldn't grab it. She could only look at him coldly and said, "Old man who, I won't hide it from you, I'm here to save my life, no matter what how much silver is owed first, and I will give it to you later." The old man who shook his head and said, "This thing can't be bought with money. It's something passed down from our ancestors. Give it to people wherever it is said." Mu Yangling didn't have time to talk nonsense with him, so he took out all the silver from his body and threw it at his feet. The old man who looked at the silver on the ground, his eyes were straight, and Hu Fang pushed him, annoyed. "You, what is it for? This is Aling's life-saving thing, get out of the way." The old man who came back to his senses, pushed Hu Fangshi away, and said to Mu Yangling, "I don't sell this wine." Mu Yangling laughed angrily, but she calmed down when she was extremely angry. She calmed down and said to Old Man Hu, "How about this, Grandpa Hu, how about I exchange my father's flag? You give me the wine, I will let Uncle Hu be the flag." Old Man Hu's eyes lit up, "Are you serious?" Mu Yangling burst out with a breathtaking aura, and looked at him coldly, "Of course it's true, Grandpa Hu, can you give me the wine now?" Old Man Hu only felt a surge of air pressure that made him unable to move. When he came back to his senses, Mu Yangling had already gone down to the cellar, and he was covered in cold sweat. Old Man Hu shuddered and hesitated, but this hesitation disappeared when he saw the silver on the ground and thought of Mu Yangling's promise.